March 21st, 1980. Port Hope, on the shore of Lake Ontario at the mouth of the Ganaraska River, had patiently endured several days of continuous rain. The ground, being still frozen, was unable to absorb the rainfall, and so the Ganaraska, fed by its many tributaries, began to rise.
Early that morning, local conservation authorities were confident that no serious flooding would occur. The Ganaraska, already swollen and flowing at the rate of 1,600 cubic feet per second, would have to double its size in order to overflow its banks in the town of Port Hope. As the rain continued, so did the rise of the river. By late in the day, it was evident that the town was in danger.
That evening, the flooding began. Streets were inundated, basements flooded, some stores and businesses completely wiped out. The raging river undermined and collapsed one building built on its banks. Floodwaters broke through showroom windows in several stores, washing merchandise out into Lake Ontario.
Policemen, firemen, officials, and townspeople worked well into the night in a massive sandbagging effort trying to save what they could of the downtown area from the rising waters. A few local shops remained open to serve hot tea and coffee to the volunteer force.
At one point during the height of the flooding, the waters trapped about a dozen people, including some children, inside two buildings. Fearing that the buildings might collapse, officials attempted a rescue by truck, but were stopped by flooded streets as they approached the structures. Another attempt was made by boat, but it also failed when the small craft was forced back by strong currents. A broken gas line further complicated the crisis, filling the area around the buildings with explosive fumes. The people were finally saved later when receding floodwaters permitted rescuers access to the buildings.
The following morning, as the water levels began to drop, it became obvious that Port Hope had suffered devastation unparalleled since the 1930s, when a similar flood struck the town. Now began the lengthy task of cleaning up and assessing damage to both public and private property.
There was about 8 feet of water in the basement.
At the height of the flood, about 4.5 feet inside the shop. Well, I would say about 50% of what was in the shop got washed out or damaged. Total damage of about $7,000–8,000.
We had 27 inches of water through the store, but we also had the basement full of water. A lot of the merchandise was lost. We have to replace the floor.
The water left, but the mud stayed, and it was the mud that had to be cleaned off everything.
In our back warehouse, it probably reached 7 feet. Of course, the basement was completely flooded, and in the store, it reached the tops of the desks. So we're looking at close to 3 feet anyway. One big window broke, 2 survived. They had a lot of water behind them. I'm surprised they did. We've been working on salvaging what we can out.
The townspeople, in an impressive effort of single-mindedness and unity, undertook to help local merchants recover, to clean debris from the streets and public parks, and in pairs they manned barriers, sealing off the downtown area from pedestrians, vehicles, and the thousands of curious onlookers from neighboring communities who came to view the destruction.
Port Hope Mayor William Wyatt.
The extent of the flood damage in Port Hope was tremendous. Only to see what happened would you ever believe it. Inventory damage was probably, in one store was about $40,000, in another store about $30,000, another store about $75,000. Other stores suffered similar damages. We're going to have to do repair work, which is unprecedented in Port Hope history. The damage also to the municipal sector of the town has been tremendous as well. The roads have been torn up. They are having to be repaired. The bridges have been affected tremendously, and this has presented problems to traffic flow. The extent of the flood damage has just been tremendous. The reaction of the townspeople has probably been one of the most amazing things. I've never doubted in my life since I've lived in Port Hope that although the people in Port Hope are a close-knit community, that they were as close as this was when the event happened. People came down to help out, offer assistance. The next day when the floods subsided and when work had to be done, I appealed over the radio for people to come down. The problem was that I had to turn people away. This is the spirit of our community. Whenever a disaster happens, you can count on everybody.
The Port Hope Town Council, in emergency session, declared the central part of the town a disaster area, closed several bridges and a number of buildings until structural engineering. Officials estimated total damage to both public and private property at $10 million.
Government response to the flood disaster was quick. Provincial Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs, Thomas Wells, said he would urge Queen's Park to declare the town a disaster area, thereby making it eligible for provincial assistance. He also said there was a possibility that the provincial government might exceed the normal dollar-for-dollar grant.
Stuart Smith, leader of the opposition at Queen's Park, also visited the site and said that the province should be prepared to match the private funds raised by more than the 1-to-1 ratio. Less than a week after the flood, Wells announced that the provincial cabinet had agreed to match every dollar raised in aid of the flood disaster by a ratio of 3-to-1.
With generous private and corporate donations now increased by the addition of government funds, the repairs to roads, sidewalks, buildings, and bridges was underway. Officials began examining new measures for flood control to ensure that the Port Hope flood of March 21st, 1980 would never happen again.